Bleach, the secret god who humbled Yhwach. Like, share and subscribe. Episode 71. Unexpected. The pouring rain in Narugi City did not mean any decrease, which directly led to more people waiting at the station. Looking at the crowded station, Yu Taifeng prepared to leave in his own way. He also wanted to rush back to the Urahara store as soon as possible to get a taste of the hot springs there. In order to avoid unnecessary trouble, Yu Taifeng found a remote alley after leaving the station. After throwing Imakuro into the system backpack, he turned into a remnant and disappeared in place. Quickly moving between the high-rise buildings, he noticed the two strands of Ryatsu coming from the outskirts of Naraki City. Yu Taifeng, who has been idle for more than 100 years, does not want to have anything to do with Soul Society for the time being. However, one of these two Ryatsu shares made him feel particularly familiar. At this moment, he instantly thought of his 687 study. Aizen Sōsuke. Reminiscent of Aizen's self-righteous messengers, Yu Taifeng couldn't help but chuckled and shook his head. Standing in the sky, he looked at the jungle in the distance and decided to take a look at this old acquaintance who hadn't seen him for many years. Shiba Ishin looked at Aizen with a solemn expression, thinking about the next battle plan in his heart. The Su that was called Subai by the other party, although its strength was far below him. But he never thought that he would be attacked by Aizen during the battle. Now that he was seriously injured, he had already prepared for the worst. Just as Shiba Ishin was preparing to launch a preemptive attack, he only felt a suffocating majestic Ryatsu rolling in from a distance. He hadn't figured out the situation yet, but he felt that he was about to be unable to support his body because of this Ryatsu. Aizen, who was not far away, changed his face greatly for unknown reasons, and began to chant inexplicable spells. However, just as Aizen acted, she was shocked by this Ryatsu and knelt on the ground. At this moment, a young man with short black hair fell from the sky and looked at Ishin and Aizen with a smile. When Shiba Ishin looked at the strange figure in front of him, there was also a panic in his heart. Because he didn't know what the stranger who suddenly appeared had attempted. But Ishin had a strange feeling, always feeling as if he had seen this person somewhere. At this moment, Aizen, who was kneeling on the ground, looked at Yu Taifeng, who had appeared out of thin air with a panic face, and a stormy wave was set off in his heart. Aizen, long time no see. What a coincidence today, I didn't expect to meet you in Naruki City. Yu Taifeng looked calmly at Aizen, who was kneeling on the ground, and his horns showed a deep smile. When Aizen saw Yu Taifeng, he couldn't help but began to curse in his heart. Read more at mtlarchive.com. What are you afraid of? He is thoughtful, but he has a nearly perfect plan. However, he couldn't think that this variable outside of the plan would actually appear here. In fact, he planned the many recent murders of Shinigami in Narugi City. Aizen's experiments with Hollow and Hogyoku have never stopped in these 100 years. Subai, who fought Shiba Ishin before, is one of his masterpieces. However, because Aizen encountered some problems in his recent experiments, he turned his attention to this world. Finding Hirako and others is part of his recent plan. However, Aizen never expected that Yu Taifeng Jing, who had disappeared, would unexpectedly appear in front of him. He hurriedly released Ryatsu from his body and stood up while resisting Yu Taifeng Ryatsu's impact. Although Aizen didn't know how strong Yu Taifeng was, he didn't dare to take it lightly. After all, his teacher was the most enchanting genius in Soul Society back then. Reminiscent of the scene after Yu Taifeng and Yamamoto fought in the heavy country, Aizen's heart couldn't help but become more nervous. So he decided to start first. Aizen stared at Yu Taifeng solemnly, holding his Zanpakuto with his backhand and pointed the tip of the sword at the ground. At this moment, Yu Taifeng's figure turned into an afterimage and appeared in front of Aizen again. I saw Yu Taifeng gripping Kyoka Suigetsu's blade tightly with his left hand, smiling and looking at Aizen with a bewildered look in front of him. Oh, what a really good Zanpakuto! Yu Taifeng said with a smile, looking at Aizen in front of him. At this moment, Shiba Ishin, who was still watching, couldn't help but be surprised when he saw the scene. He had never seen a situation where he took the sword before the battle started. Aizen never imagined that he wanted to launch Kyoka Suigetsu's Shurikai and then get the other party into the environment, but because of Yu Taifeng's move, it would be directly ruined. The scene that was simulated in his mind will certainly not reappear. Because now, his Kyoka Suigetsu is being held tightly by the opponent and unable to move. Why would he grab the sword as soon as he came up? The true abilities of Kyoka Suigetsu are known to Tosen and Jin, besides me. What is this? Is this just a coincidence? Aizen looked at Yu Taifeng in astonishment, and said in his heart. 90 of Hado. Black Coffin. Aizen looked at Yu Taifeng with a smile on his face, and decisively changed his attack method. He decided to use Kido to make up for his current disadvantage. However, the black coffin shrouded in weird purple light has not yet formed, and it begins to shatter and dissipate like shattered glass. Shiba Ishin stared at the two people not far away in a daze, and said to himself involuntarily, it turned out to be fight against ghosts. Yu Taifeng looked at Aizen, whose face was uncertain. He shook his head slightly and chuckled, if I remember correctly. When Aizen was a 1.6 student, he often asked me questions about Kido. Over the years, it seems that your level of chanting and discarding has improved a lot. Aizen never thought that Yu Taifeng would see through his own ideas once again. More importantly, when the other party uses anti-ghost killing, he just grabs a hand in the air with his right hand, and there is no process of chanting and discarding. At this moment, an inexplicable sense of powerlessness and fear surged into Aizen's heart. Although Yu Taifeng still had a smile on his face, the more he did this, the more it made Aizen feel shocked. Does he have the power to see through people's hearts? Aizen couldn't help but thought in his heart. Just when Yu Taifeng wanted to reminisce with Aizen, a special energy fluctuation came from behind Aizen. Episode 72. Lingzi arrows from afar. Naruki City, in a manor. A young girl, with short orange hair on the sides walked slowly into the hall. At this time, a white-haired man about 40 to 50 years old was looking into the distance with his hands behind his back. Uncle Ishida, what are you looking at? The girl came to the man and said with a smile. The white-haired man turned his head and held his glasses with his hand. He said with a serious expression, Saki, do you feel the 3 strands of Ryatsu in the distance? Kurosaki Maki said with a smile, Uncle Ishida, of course I feel such a strong Ryatsu, and I also feel different things from those 3 Ryatsu. Ishida Zhongshuan was slightly shocked, and he asked curiously, Saki, come tell me what you sensed. I think about it. 2 of the 3 Ryatsu have the breath of Shinigami, while the other one is a bit confusing. It clearly felt like Shinigami's breath, but there was a feeling of emptiness. In fact, this is not the most important thing. I feel that there is a mysterious power in Ryatsu that I have never seen before. But the Ryatsu who possesses 3 powers can make me feel palpitations even so far apart. 07. I'm afraid that person's actual strength must be very strong. Kurosaki Masaki said seriously. After hearing the girl's words, Ishida Zhongshuan showed a faint smile on his face, nodded and said, I didn't expect Saki you to improve so fast. If reaction knows it, I will be jealous again, haha. Kurosaki Masaki gently covered his face, and said shyly, Uncle Ishida made a joke about him again. Long Xian is much better than me. How can I be clever? At this moment, a white-haired teenager with a middle score walked into the living room from outside the door. Father, there is a sense of futility in that direction. I will go over and solve him now. The white-haired boy said excitedly. Ishida Zhongshan looked at his excited son, and gently shook his head and said, Long Xian, your temper is still so impatient. Can't you feel that there are 3 more powerful Ryatsu around that virtual? Especially the strongest mysterious Ryatsu, I am afraid that the legendary Star-Cross Knights are not so powerful. Ishida Ryujin snorted disdainfully, and said, it's not a big deal for 3 Shinigami. When they and Su lose both, I will kill them along with the Su. Humph. You are too arrogant. Forget it, go back to the room first, I have something to discuss with Shinsaki. Ishida Zhongshan shook his head helplessly, and ordered. Reaction wanted to explain something more, but when he saw his father's stern eyes, he could only walk to the 2nd floor obediently, and did not forget to make a face for Saki before leaving. Ishida Zhongshan looked at Shinsaki with pure eyes, sighed softly, and said, Masaki, I won't repeat the history of our Quincy clan. Today I want to talk to you about the marriage of Long Xian. After a few minutes of communication, Ishida Zhongshuan sighed heavily and looked helplessly at the fading back of Masaki outside the manor. Read more at mtlarchive.com. What a stubborn child, maybe you will agree to this when you grow older, Ishida said with some regret. Then he looked back at the directions of Ryatsu. The heavy rain in Naruki City has been getting heavier, but the 3 people in the jungle have their own plans. Why hasn't Tosen arrived yet? Aizen asked inwardly. He looked at Yu Taifeng in front of him, but he felt anxious. At this moment, a strange spatial fluctuation came from behind Aizen. I saw a black piercing gate instantly appeared behind him. Yu Taifeng looked at what was happening in front of him with interest, smiled and said to Aizen, Save the soldiers? At this moment, 2 waves of murderous Ryatsu passed through the gate. Shoot it. Shinso. A blade stretched indefinitely at an unimaginable speed, and struck behind Aizen. Yu Taifeng loosened his grip on Kyoka Suigetsu's left hand, and then quickly disappeared where he was. Aizen, who turned his back to the piercing gate, also flashed to the side of the piercing gate. My lord, we are late. Please punish you. Tosen Kaname, wearing silver goggles, walked out of the gate first, and said in a low voice with fear on one knee. Aizen looked at Yu Taifeng leaping into the air, gritted his teeth bitterly, and hurriedly walked into the gate. Following the departure of Aizen and others, the empty white that was released by Aizen not long ago also rushed towards Shiba Ishin vigorously. Carefully. With a soft drink, a beautiful shadow stood in front of Ishin. It was Kurosaki Masaki, who went out to relax after leaving Ishida's house. When she just wanted to use spiritual power to condense the Lingzi Bao, she only found a sharp pain in her left arm. Shiba Ishin looked at the girl who came forward in surprise, and hurriedly pulled him behind him. After going through the fight against the Vayne and the sneak attack by his colleagues, Ishin's long-repressed anger was completely ignited. He glared at Tsubai, who had changed his body and receded back, waved Zanpakuto, and shouted angrily, Crescent Moon Sky Chong. A blue crescent-shaped blade quickly slashed towards the empty white who had just stabilized his figure. Boom rumble. A loud noise, with billowing dust and smoke, appeared in the position of Tsubai. Shiba Ishin was shocked to find that an attack he had just used his full strength to cut out, unexpectedly changed the trajectory and flew into the sky inexplicably. How come? That's the crescent moon. What is the situation? Shiba Ishin looked at this weird scene that happened before his eyes, and you were stunned for a while. After a few seconds, as the smoke gradually dissipated, Shiba Ishin could see the scene not far away. I saw the black-haired young man who seemed to be familiar with 687 before, standing beside the fallen Tsubai and fiddled with his feet casually. When Aizen used the gate of Tosen Kaname summon to leave, the bored Yu Taifeng turned his attention to the empty white body. When he was about to kill Tsubai, he only saw the scene of the violent Tsubai attacking Ishin. What surprised him was that a young girl who appeared in the distance was inexplicably blocked in front of Ishin, and instead let herself be bitten by Tsubai. When Shiba Ishin swung his sword out of the crescent moon, Yu Taifeng suddenly came to Tsubai's side, and beheaded it. He will never let others do it for him. After hitting Ishin's attack with Zanpakuto casually, Yu Taifeng also looked at the two not far away curiously. Shiba Ishin looked at the familiar figure holding the black Zanpakuto in the distance. First of all, I thought of the portrait hanging in the family secret room, and then I thought of some legend circulated in Seriidii when I was a child. At this moment, Shiba Ishin, who was supporting Kurosaki Shinsaki with his left hand, tremblingly raised his right hand to cover his gaze. His eyes were full of horror. Yu Taifeng looked at the two not far away, and showed his iconic smile again. Shiba Ishin looked at Yu Taifeng in the distance with horror, and said tremblingly, You are. However, Shiba Ishin hadn't finished speaking, but only saw 2 blue spirit arrows in the distance, swiftly attacking him and Yu Taifeng respectively. Episode 73. Misunderstanding? When Tsubai died, the system prompt also appeared in Yu Taifeng's mind. Ding. The box around the host is detected. Is the host turned on? Yu Taifeng glanced at the box that fell at his feet, and responded to the system, turn it on. Ding. Congratulations to the host for acquiring Ryatsu's 2000. Ding. Congratulations to the host for getting the ringtone. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining steel skin. The system prompt tone disappears gradually after the broadcast is finished. The ring and steel skin obtained from Tsubai's body really surprised Yu Taifeng. After opening the personal properties panel of the system, he began to check it. The strongest box picking system. Host, Yu Taifeng. Ability, Shinigami, Quincy, Void, Hell. Special skills, Omniscience and Omnipotence, Exploration Circuit, 0, Sound Turn, Rigid Skin. Ryatsu, 296369. Kendo, Ultimate. White Hits, Extreme. Shuanpa, Extreme. Kido, All Proficient. %3D. After putting away the system panel, Yu Taifeng turned his attention to Ishin and Masaki, not far away. Having traveled to the Shinigami world for nearly 1,000 years, Yu Taifeng never thought of meeting the two in this way. But this is not what he should consider now. After all, Aizen's Hogyoku has not been completed yet, and the parents of the teenager Kurosaki Ichigo met for the first time today. But Shiba Ishin's current reaction really made him feel a little speechless. Seeing him with a panic look on his face, people who don't know really think he isn't a devil. Just as Yu Taifeng was about to leave, he felt a faint Ryatsu coming from a distance. When he turned his head and looked in the direction from Ryatsu, he saw only 2 blue spirit arrows flying towards him. After he flew the Lingzi arrow that flew in front of him casually, he looked at the white-haired boy who came quickly with interest. Ishida Longxian? Yu Taifeng squinted slightly and said softly. Shiba Ishin looked at the Rizy arrow in front of him, and regardless of Saki's dissuasion in his arms, he used his body to carry this inexplicable attack. When Ishida Ryujin learned from his father that Shinsaki was out to relax, he hurriedly chased him out of the house. After feeling Maki's Ryatsu moving towards the place where Ryatsu broke out before, Ryukshuin rushed over here. Read more at mtlarchive.com. When he saw Shinsaki falling in the arms of others in the distance, he did not hesitate to raise his hand and launch 2 spirit arrows for fear that the other party would hurt her. Ishida Ryukshin nervously looked at an unidentified stranger not far away, feeling anxious in his heart. The Shinigami who was holding Shinigami was also seriously injured, but the Ryatsu exuding from his body was shocking. The other young man with short black hair seemed unremarkable, but gave people an unfathomable feeling. In particular, he casually shot the arrow of his soul, which made Long Xian more certain that the 2 people in front of him must have some ulterior conspiracy. Shinigami. Quickly let go of Misa. I'll be your opponent. Ishida Ryujin shouted. Shiba Ishin realized that this was a misunderstanding, but when he thought of the identity of the one in front of him, he couldn't help but squeeze a sweat for the stranger not far away. Queen's killer, all this is just a misunderstanding. We are not malicious. Is this girl your companion? He was bitten by a dummy just because he was saving me, and the situation now looks a bit bad. Shiba Ishin hurriedly explained aloud in order to prevent Yu Taifeng from injuring himself after the rampage. Misunderstanding? You Shinigami don't have a good thing. Hurry up and hand over Maki. Otherwise, don't blame me for being polite. Although Ishida Ryukshin felt nervous for a while, thinking that there were still hostages in the opponent's hands, he could only hold them back first. Ah, it hurts. After Kurosaki Masaki uttered a painful een, a large amount of white hollow power gushed out of his eyes, mouth, and nose in an instant. Shiba Ishin couldn't help but feel nervous when looking at Maki. It was the first time he had encountered this kind of infection after being attacked by a falsehood. A violent Ryatsu spouted from Kurosaki Shinsaki and directly knocked Ishin, who was holding him, into the air. Ryukshin not far away looked at the scene in front of him in a panic. He would never have thought that such a change would happen to Shinsaki's body. This also made him more certain that his judgment was correct. Roar? When Shinsaki's face was completely wrapped in the white mask, there was a roar in her mouth that didn't look like a human being. Shiba Ishin felt ashamed when he looked at Misa, who had become a monster to help him. At this time, some legends of Siriidii 100 years ago were also suddenly thought of in his mind. The soul disappears and Shinigami hollow. At this moment, an idea that can completely subvert cognition appeared in his mind. Aizen turned out to be behind the scenes. Ishin dodges Hollow's attack with difficulty, while thinking about the solution in his mind. When he saw Yu Taifeng smiling not far away, he seemed to have grasped the straw. After avoiding Hollow's another attack, he was ready to ask the opponent for help. However, Shiba Ishin only saw Yu Taifeng's figure instantly turned into an afterimage and disappeared. In an instant, he appeared directly behind Ishida Ryukshin. Boom. After a loud noise, Ishida Ryukshin flew out like a rag doll that was shot flying. In the jungle, he broke several big trees with thick trunks, one after another. When Ishida Longxian finally fell on the ground, Wang Qianzhao, he didn't know how many bones he had broken. After spitting out a few bites of blood again, he passed out. Shiba Ishin shuddered involuntarily when he looked at the tragic situation of the dragon string in the distance. Ishin, who was seriously injured, also fell to the ground helplessly because of his injuries. He could only watch Yu Taifeng walking towards Maki with a sword. However, what made Ishin even more surprised was that after Yu Taifeng used the tip of the sword to aim at Saki, he actually sucked out the power of Hollow in the opponent's body. After a while, the white mask on Masaki's face seemed to melt into a stream of white water, all of which was absorbed into Yu Taifeng's body. Shiba Ishin didn't understand the principle, but after seeing Shinsaki who had lifted Hollow and fainted, Shuinpa hurried to her side and held him. When Ishin just wanted to ask Yu Taifeng, he only saw that the other party had turned into an afterimage and disappeared in place. Episode 74. Start planning. Karakura Town, Karakura First Senior High School. Yu Taifeng, who had just finished a class for the students, began to pack up the teaching plan materials he used for the class. Looking at the energetic students in the classroom, he smiled softly and said, "It's nice to be young." After finishing the day's work, Yu Taifeng walked towards his residence. At this time, a loud noise not far away caught his attention. "What do you want? Boy. You were the one who kicked the hill down suddenly, right?" A young man wearing a white hat and hip-hop yelled at a teenager with orange hair. "Oh." The boy looked at the group of people surrounding him and hummed with disdain in response. After listening to the boy's answer, the white hat youth's face was already full of anger at the moment. When he just waved his fist and was about to give a severe lesson to the orange-haired boy, he was stepped directly on his face by the other party, and then he fell to the ground with his nose. However, the orange-haired boy didn't stop because of this. He still kept stomping on the opponent's head with his feet, and he didn't mean to be merciful at all. The young man who fell to the ground hurriedly asked for mercy, and his companions looked nervously at the orange-haired boy at this time. "He, 687, is so unreasonable." The companion of the white hat youth pointed the orange-haired boy with his fingers, and said tremblingly. However, when the orange-haired boy heard the broken thoughts not far away, he pointed his finger at a telegraph pole not far away and shouted loudly, "You guys, look there." Everyone looked in the direction of the boy's fingers, and saw a broken glass bottle with flowers lying quietly next to a telephone pole. These gangster-looking youths just remembered that it turned out that they had smashed the glass bottle when they were skateboarding just now. When they just wanted to apologize, they were knocked to the ground by the orange-haired boy in twos. "If I meet you again, I will let you be confessed with flowers." The orange-haired boy pointed his finger at several people and shouted loudly. After several young people hurriedly apologized, they ran away in a hurry. "This way, no one will come near here," the orange-haired boy said to himself while walking to the telephone pole and supporting the broken glass bottle in half. "Tomorrow I will bring you new flowers." "Obg," the orange-haired boy said to the empty telephone pole. At this time, a little girl with a double ponytail gradually emerged next to the wire pole. She smiled and said to the orange-haired boy, "Thank you for showing up and helping me, so that I can live a quiet life. Thank you, elder brother." At this moment, Yu Taifeng, carrying a briefcase, smiled and walked in front of the orange-haired boy, and said softly, "What a coincidence, Kurosaki classmate." Kurosaki Ichigo looked at the teacher in front of him, snorted softly, then turned and left. Read more at mtlarchive.com. Yu Taifeng looked at Ichigo's fading back, chuckled and shook his head, and continued to walk towards his residence. 20 years have passed in a flash, and Yu Taifeng has become a teacher again after years of tossing and turning. He is now not only teaching at Karakura No. 1 Senior High School, but also the head teacher of Kurosaki Ichigo. Not only that, but Orihime, Ishida Yuryu, Sato Yasutora, and others are also in this class. After returning to his residence, Yu Taifeng sat on the sofa and began to think. From encountering Shiba Ishin and others to the present, he has been studying how to comprehend Bankai in these 2 decades. During the period, he also went to Hueco Mundo and Hell several times to conduct research, and finally found out what is the prerequisite for mastering Bankai. Because his Zanpakuto has the ability to absorb the enemy Ryatsu and the surrounding environment, and release the absorbed power again. So he thought of the ability to glutton in the fairy tale. Every time his own Zanpakuto Shirkai and absorbs Ryatsu, he will save some of the absorbed Ryatsu in the Zanpakuto space. Although, the retained Ryatsu is insignificant compared to the Ryatsu value of close to 300,000 in his body. However, it has been accumulating slowly. In the end, he found that if he wanted to comprehend Bankai, he had to make the Ryatsu accumulated in the Zanpakuto space reach a certain level. It has been 1,000 years since he came to the world of Shinigami, and his current strength has reached a bottleneck, and it is difficult to make any further progress. At present, the most realistic method is to kill some strong players through the box-picking system to obtain the Ryatsu value. Only in this way can we understand Bankai as early as possible. Looking at the timeline, Aizen's research on Hogyoku is almost mature. I just need to wait quietly now. Wait until Kurosaki Ichigo has fully stimulated all the potential in his body, and when Aizen successfully researched Hogyoku, that's when he started to close the net. As for the strong like Espada, in his eyes it is nothing more than a pile of boxes. In a good mood, Yu Taifeng ate something casually, then went into the bedroom to rest for a while. In the evening, he decided to go out for a walk when he had nothing to do. As he walked, he came to an izakaya. After entering the izakaya for a swig, Yu Taifeng took a walk in the night with satisfaction. At this time, a black-haired girl in a deadly attire came towards him. Yu Taifeng looked at the girl from far and near, with a look of comprehension on her face. When the girl passed him by, Yu Taifeng couldn't help turning his head to look at the girl. Rukia Kuchiki, who is on a mission, is looking for traces of the imaginary. The Ryatsu, who had been tracking by her, disappeared inexplicably as if being covered up by something. At this time, she noticed the strange look in the eyes of a stranger on the road. Is it an illusion? Why does it feel like he keeps staring at me? It stands to reason that ordinary people like them should not see me. It must be an illusion. But why do you always feel like seeing this person somewhere? Although Rukia was full of doubts, thinking that she still had a task behind her, she shook her head and continued to walk forward. At this time, a strange loud noise caught Rukia's attention. She hurriedly held her hand on the handle of the sword and hurried away in the direction where the loud noise occurred. Episode 75. Have to send the arrow on the string? A few days later, Yu Taifeng, who was preparing a lesson plan, received a notice from the school and learned that a new transfer student would come to his class. When he thought of the Rukia he had met previously, he already guessed who the transfer student was. The next day, the teacher from the admissions office took Rukia to Yu Taifeng's office, and after a while, he turned around and left. After graduating from the Spiritual Arts Academy, Rukia never thought that she would become a student again. When he saw Yu Taifeng as his head teacher, he couldn't help but feel a little surprised. Because before he met Kurosaki Ichigo, he had met the teacher in front of him. She still remembers clearly that the teacher in front of her once looked at her eyes. I can't feel the fluctuations in his spiritual power at all. Could it be my illusion? Rukia lowered her head in thought. Rukia classmate? Yu Taifeng looked at the student file in his hand and smiled to Rukia. Rukia, who was still in thought, had only reacted to his gaffe. She hurriedly raised her head and responded with a smile, "Yes, teacher, this is Rukia Kuchiki. Nice to meet you." Yu Taifeng smiled and nodded, and said, "I happen to be in charge of the first class today. Come with me to meet new classmates in the class." After a while, the two walked into the classroom of Class 1 and 3 of senior high school. Yu Taifeng looked at the students in the class and smiled and said, "Classmates, today we have a new classmate in our class. Now let's ask her to introduce herself. Welcome everyone." Sitting at the window, Kurosaki Ichigo was bored. After seeing Rukia standing on the podium with a smile, he almost fell to the ground. Yu Taifeng saw this scene in his eyes, a strange light flashed in his eyes. In a blink of an eye, another month passed. Yu Taifeng saw the changes in Kurosaki Ichigo, Inoue Oriheim, Sato Yasutora, and others in his eyes, but he didn't say much. Although Karakura No. 1 Senior High School explicitly prohibits students from skipping classes, who hasn't passed their school days, hasn't they? Besides, this is Shinigami's world. On this day, Yu Taifeng, who finished his work early, left the school early. Suddenly, hundreds of Ryatsu stocks of varying strengths suddenly appeared everywhere in Karakura town. After feeling these weak Ryatsu, Yu Taifeng shook his head slightly, and walked towards a pub that he frequented. Soul Society, Siriidii. The 12th Squad, in the Technology Development Bureau. Under the light of hundreds of screens, several Shinigami wearing white lab coats are busy dealing with the work at hand. At this time, one of the larger screens actually started to flash red. Dee-dee. Diddy-dee. After a few seconds, a burst of alarm sounds began to be heard from the instrument below. Those Shinigami who were still busy with their heads looking down at the moment also looked up at the instrument and the screen that issued the alarm. When one of Shinigami saw the information displayed on the screen, an unbelievable expression appeared on his face. Hundreds of small white dots appeared on the flashing red screen. As time went by, a red dot slowly appeared on the screen, and it was getting bigger and bigger. As the third seat of the 12th Squad, Aizen, the deputy director of the Technology Development Bureau, hurried to the instrument after hearing the sirens. Report. There are a large number of false appearances in Karakura town, read more at mtlarchive.com. Although these phantoms disappeared very quickly, a Jillian-level Minos Grande appeared. One of them, Shinigami hurriedly reported. Ajin looked at the screen in front of her, and said with a serious expression, "It's really rare that so many virtual things appear at once. According to the speed at which these white spots disappear, someone must have killed them. But what is going wrong behind this? And where did that Jillian come from?" After hearing Ajin's words, the Shinigami beside the instrument began to think seriously. After a long time, Aizen opened his mouth and ordered, "Report this to the chief and the various teams as soon as possible." "Yes, Deputy Director." After everyone answered in unison, they each got busy. Yu Taifeng walked out of the izakaya contentedly. As he walked to his residence, he felt the hundreds of Ryatsu's movements before. After feeling the slowly disappearing Ryatsu, he smiled and shook his head and said, "Today's Karakura town is really lively." When the hundreds of Ryatsu appeared, Yu Taifeng thought of a plot in Shinigami's original work. Ishida Yulong challenged Kurosaki Ichigo. Whoever can kill 100 empties first is the winner. Judging by the number of those voids and the speed of their disappearance, Yu Taifeng has been certain that the voids that appeared out of nowhere in Karakura town are naturally the masterpieces of Ishida Yulong. If the plot continues to develop, Aizen should also kill room 46 in the next step. He is very curious now. How does Aizen feel when he goes to room 46? While Yu Taifeng was thinking about the problem, he only felt a violent spatial fluctuation coming from above his head. At this moment, a huge crack of 100 meters long appeared slowly in the midair above his head. A Jillian wearing a white pointed nose mask slowly tore the cracks and stretched out his head. Roar. An angry roar came into Yu Taifeng's ears. He looked up at this Jillian, chuckled, and snorted. Roar? With Jillian's roar again, a dazzling red light appeared in its mouth. Zero, look for flowers. When this Jillian started brewing Zero, Yu Taifeng's complexion couldn't help but turn gloomy. He raised his head again and looked at Jillian above his head, his eyes full of killing intent. In fact, Yu Taifeng didn't bother to take care of these nosy matters in his heart. However, if Jillian is allowed to launch Zero, he is likely to be attacked in the first round. Because this guy happened to be on top of his head. A wave of majestic Ryatsu spewed out from Yu Taifeng, rushing into the sky with bursts of strong murderous intent. When Jillian above his head felt the horror Ryatsu from the ground, she shrank back in fear. However, the Zero in its mouth is about to be brewed, and it is already an arrow on the string and has to be sent. Yu Taifeng stared at Jillian above his head with indifferent eyes, and let out a cold snort of dissatisfaction. At this moment, the one who killed the entire Hueco Mundo alone is back. Jillian, who just wanted to launch Zero, seemed to think of something terrible after seeing the figure on the ground. Although, its body shape is more than 100 times larger than Yu Taifeng. But at this time, this Jillian seemed to have seen his natural enemy. It hurriedly swallowed Zero, which was ready to go. Boom rumble. In an instant, a violent explosion sounded from Jillian's fingers. A painful wailing sounded from Jillian's body. But when it saw Yu Taifeng on the ground, it didn't dare to make any more noises, and quickly retreated into the space crack behind it. It disappeared without a trace in an instant. At this moment, somewhere in the park. When Rukia Kuchiki, Kurosaki Ichigo, and Ishida Yuryu saw this completely unreasonable scene, they all looked at each other in a daze. Did he harm himself? Rukia stammered in an incredible tone. Kurosaki Ichigo. Ishida Yulong. At the entrance of Urahara store, Urahara Kasuke and Tessai Tsukabashi also saw this weird scene. When the two thought of the familiar Ryatsu before, they couldn't help but start to doubt people. Urahara Kasuke looked at Tessai Tsukabashi with a look of embarrassment, and the muscles of her horns trembled slightly. Then he said, "Teacher, he actually asked Jillian to swallow his Zero." Tessai Tsukabashi's originally dark face gradually turned white. He glanced in the direction where Jillian had disappeared, then turned to look at Urahara Kasuke. Then he said in a deep voice, "It doesn't seem to be a big deal to the teacher, right?" Episode 76. Aizen shot. Soul Society, Siriidii, 5th Division Team House. Aizen Sōsuke, the captain of the 5th Division, was standing quietly in the calligraphy professor's room, staring at a calligraphy work hanging on the wall. The evening breeze blew over the branches in the garden with a rustling sound. At this time, the door behind Aizen opened slightly. A breeze blew again, and the door that had just opened closed again. At this moment, Aizen, who was standing still, had quietly released his Ryatsu and slowly enveloped the entire room. Accompanied by a burst of hard-to-catch footsteps, Tosen Kaname wearing silver goggles slowly appeared beside Aizen. After he made a movement of folding clothes, he knelt down on one knee and said respectfully in a low voice, "Master Aizen. As you expected. All plans are progressing very smoothly." After Shinigami was inspired by 737, the teenager made rapid progress. But Aizen still looked at the calligraphy hanging on the wall, as if Tosen Kaname beside him was air. After a long time, he asked quietly, "What happened?" After hearing Aizen's words, Tosen hurriedly responded in a low voice. The Jillian who was under control was not repelled by the boy. But after inexplicably self-harm, he retreated by himself. After hearing the unexpected news, Aizen frowned slightly and turned to look at Tosen Kaname in front of him, and then asked, "Is that the person?" "Master Aizen." "It's exactly what you said." However, according to the situation at the time, he did not make a move. "It just released his own Ryatsu," Tosen Kaname reported. Aizen looked at Tosen in front of him and said softly, "I see, you can go back." After hearing what Aizen said, Tosen Kaname didn't dare to hesitate, nodded gently and said, "Yes. Lord Aizen." After bowing to Aizen, his figure slowly disappeared in place. I saw that the door opened slightly, and then slowly closed again. After Tosen Kaname left, Aizen also put away the Ryatsu he had just released, and slowly sat on a futon. At this moment, Aizen frowned, and a lingering figure gradually emerged in his mind. After shook his head lightly, Aizen said with a firm gaze, "If you can do it, I can do it too." After speaking, he made a dressing action. After a while, Aizen's figure and Ryatsu completely disappeared in the room. In the early morning of the next day, Qingjing Tagulin was located not far from room 46. 46 elders dressed similarly, under the escort of the guards, slowly walked towards the 46 room. After a while, they entered the 46 room in an orderly manner. When the 46 elders took their seats in the corresponding order, the environment of the entire 46 room gradually dimmed. Only the empty area in the center remained, with a trace of light projected from the skylight. Read more at mtlarchive.com. At this time, Aizen gently lifted the hood on the beginning, and his figure slowly appeared in the bright area. When all the members of room 46 saw Aizen who appeared out of thin air, they exclaimed, "Who are you? How dare to break into the 46 room? Bold. The quick report is on your name." "Huh? You are the captain of the 5th division, Aizen Sōsuke? Do you know the consequences of trespassing in room 46? Guard. Guard. Come in and catch this arrogant." At this moment, the members of room 46 scolded one after another. Aizen ignored the yelling people around, just looked around with a smile. When the day was about to dawn, Aizen was already outside the 46th room. After using Kyoka Suijetsu hypnosis for all the guards around, he directly entered the 46 room, waiting for the arrival of the 46 elders. Therefore, no matter how loud they yell, it has no effect. Aizen looked at the tall elderly people around him, and snorted with a chuckle. At this time, the old man codenamed Six slowly got up, pointed at Aizen angrily, and said, "Can't you hear what I am waiting for?" Aizen looked at the old man who took the lead and asked with a chuckle, "Do you know who you are talking to?" Obviously the old man was a little unexpected, and the other party would ask himself directly. He became angry and yelled at Aizen, "Looking at you with a gentle appearance, whoever thought you were an arrogant person who could not be disciplined and contempt the elders?" Aizen still looks at the old man who is angry at him with a smile on his face. However, in the next second, I saw a sharp sword light across the old man's neck. In an instant, there was an extra headless corpse with a different head. "Ah. You are bold. You killed the Narita secretary for no reason. Quickly catch it. I may still take you lightly when I wait." "Aizen Sōsuke. Do you know what this is?" "Guard. Catch this evil fanatic. Even if the Spirit King is here today, you will not escape death." When the remaining 45 old men saw this scene, they all stood up involuntarily. They shouted angrily at Aizen, trying to vent their dissatisfaction in this way. What's more, even the Spirit King moved out. "Are you the Spirit King? Haha, it's just a poor wedge." Aizen looked at everyone with unchanged expression, and shook his head helplessly. Now he seemed to be unable to hear the shouts around him. Because at this moment, the lingering figure in his mind appeared again like a dream monster. Aizen couldn't figure out why he would think of him again. Annoyed, Aizen directly pulled out Zanpakuto from his waist and pointed the tip of the sword at the ground. At this time, the time in room 46 seemed to have stopped. A strange blue light was uploaded from Kyoka Suijetsu's blade, illuminating all the dark spaces in a blink of an eye. 1.6. The flat ground seemed to turn into a blue lake in an instant. When the tip of Kyoka Suijetsu's sword touched the ground, ripples were emitted. After seeing the blue light, the remaining 45 elders all showed flat edges on their bodies. Then he fell to the ground one after another. I can do what you can do. Soul Society's most enchanting genius? It's a stubborn man who shouts and kills. The moment I stand above the sky, you will also kneel at my feet and bow down. At this moment, there is something about Aizen, who seemed kind before. Now he was looking at the corpses around him with a sullen look, and said loudly, in a hysterical tone. On the second day, the 6th Division Team House. Abarai Renji threw off the seat officer who was blocking him, and walked towards the captain's room angrily. Episode 77. Plan start. Soul Society, Jinglingting, 6th Division Team House. Deputy Captain Abarai. Captain Kuchiki is busy, please wait a moment. Deputy Captain Abarai. A thin middle-aged man followed behind Abarai Renji, persuading him with embarrassment. However, Renji didn't hear the other party's words, and moved on after shaking off the other party. After a while, he walked into the captain's room of the 6th Division through fantasy. At this moment, Byakuya Kuchiki sat on the futon calmly and looked at Renji walking in the distance. Captain Kuchiki, Rukia, Renji took a deep breath, and said hesitantly. Byakuya Kuchiki lightly raised his eyes and glanced at the other person, and then whispered, "It seems that you have also heard about Renji Rukia. The 46 room has issued a ruling order, ordering you and me to go to this world to bring her back." After hearing these words, Renji frowned and looked at Byakuya. After a while, he said, "But Captain Rukia, she must be innocent." Renji. Take a look at this. Byakuya Kuchiki looked at the excited Renji in front of him blankly, took out a letter from his arms, and gently placed it on the table 07 beside him. Renji hurriedly took the letter on the table in his hand, and looked at it solemnly. Now, Karakura Town. After experiencing the last Jillian invasion, Yu Taifeng immediately thought of the plot in Shinigami's original work. If the plot has not changed, Rukia should be taken away by Byakuya Kuchiki and Abarai Renji in the next few days. Yu Taifeng, who had just finished a class, thought of it in his heart while packing up the lesson plans on the desk. He looked at the empty desks of Ichigo and Rukia, turned his head and looked out the window. In the distance Yu Taifeng was looking at, Kurosaki Ichigo's familiar Ryatsu was slowly gaining strength. Sure enough, he was a boy. He chuckled and shook his head, then walked outside the classroom with the packed things in his hand. Boom. At this time, a girl with long brown hair ran into Yu Taifeng impartially. She involuntarily stepped back 2 steps and hit the wall of the corridor. "Teacher, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it." Inoue Oriheim hurriedly rubbed the back of his head, then came to Yu Taifeng and lowered his head. Yu Taifeng glanced at Inoue Oriheim with a smile, and then whispered, "It's okay, let's get busy." Inoue Oriheim looked at the direction Yu Taifeng was leaving, with a curious look in his eyes. At this time, a red-haired girl wearing glasses quietly appeared beside Inoue. She looked at Inoue Oriheim with excitement, and a few drops of crystal saliva flowed slowly from the corner of her mouth. Kawaii Oriheim is so cute. Even the way she apologizes makes her heart beat faster, huh? The artisan Chizuru pouted lightly, and leaned toward Oriheim's cheek. Read more at mtlarchive.com. Quickly stop me. Chanha. After seeing this scene, Arisawa Tatsuki, with short light blue hair, directly locked Chizuru with both hands to prevent this rotten girl from doing any weird behavior to Inoue Oriheim. Why does it feel like he is different from other teachers? Inoue Oriheim murmured. Long Gue realized that Oriheim's attention was not on the two of them at all. After letting go of Chizuru, she came to Oriheim and asked curiously, "Oriheim would be interested in the teacher?" Only then did Inoue Oriheim react to the gaffe he had just made, and hurriedly explained with a blushing face, "Long Gue, what are you talking nonsense? I don't understand me at all." At this time, Chizuru, who got rid of the shackles, had quietly appeared behind Oriheim. She gently leaned into Oriheim's ear from behind, and said with a look of longing, "It's just Oriheim likes, I can also hey, who makes Oriheim so cute." Long Gue looked at Yu Taifeng's disappearing back, and Kurosaki Ichigo appeared in his mind. When she saw Chanha, who looked like a Chi-Han, a few black lines appeared on her head, and she immediately flew Ki and Harui out. Soul Society, Siriidii, 5th Division Team House. Tosen Kaname walked towards the courtyard of the 5th Division with a serious face. "Captain Tosen." "Hello Captain Tosen." After the 2 team members who were cleaning up looked at the oncoming Tosen Kaname, they stopped their work and bowed slightly. %3. Tosen Kaname, who walked forward quickly, just nodded slightly, and went on without any pause. After watching Tosen's fading back, the two team members talked in a low voice. How does Captain Tosen of the 9th Division feel cold? Who knows, I heard he has always been like this. It's better to Captain Aizen, who is so approachable at all times. Of course, Captain Aizen is known for his good temper in the entire 13th Division. In the hallway connecting the captain's room, Tosen Kaname felt the oncoming Aizen. He bowed his head respectfully and said, Master Aizen. Everything is going well. Byakuya Kuchiki has been leading Abarai Renji for a long time. Aizen's face was as calm as water, he nodded slightly, and then turned and walked towards the captain's room. Tosen Kaname followed quietly. Now, Karakura town. The street at night is like a calm river, winding 740 in the shadow of dense trees. The leaves blown by the evening breeze seem to recall the excitement and busyness of the day. Yu Taifeng leisurely carried the briefcase in his hand, and walked out of a wine shop contentedly. He has learned to enjoy life in the hundreds of years since he came to this world. Drinking is his biggest hobby. Although Yu Taifeng has never been drunk at all, because of the high density of the souls in his body. However, he really likes the scorching sensation of strong alcohol after it enters his throat. After walking into a convenience store, Yu Taifeng bought another bottle of super high alcohol spirits. When he walked out of the convenience store, he had already drunk most of the bottle of wine. He walked slowly towards his residence in this way, raising the bottle in his hand and taking a sip from time to time. Suddenly, a few heavy ryatsu came from not far away. After feeling the strong murderous aura of one of the strangers, ryatsu, he walked over there with interest. At this moment, Kurosaki Ichigo, who fell to the ground, looked at the two strange Shinigami in front of him, with unwillingness and despair in his heart. Brother Byakuya. Please let him go. When Rukia thought of Byakuya Kuchiki's terrible strength, she quickly persuaded her. At this time, Rukia saw a familiar figure slowly walking towards this side. Episode 78. People with infinite possibilities. As Yu Taifeng's figure slowly emerged from the shadows, Rukia's complexion became more tense. When she thought that Byakuya Kuchiki and others were all spirit bodies, she slowly relaxed. However, Ishida Yulong, who was not far from them, was a real flesh and blood body. This made Rukia's heart that had been put down again, tightly. I hope he won't be nosy, or else the aftermath of Kuchiki's battle will cause him to be seriously injured. Rukia looked at Yu Taifeng, getting closer and worried. Kurosaki Ichigo and Ishida Yulong naturally noticed Yu Taifeng, who came slowly. At this moment, they all have their own ideas in their hearts. Because Kurosaki Ichigo knows that he is a spirit body, he and Rukia have the same thoughts. It was Ishida Yulong who was also injured. After seeing Yu Taifeng's figure, he persuaded loudly, Teacher. Get out of here. This is dangerous. Yu Taifeng smiled and looked at Yulong's words and comforted him, Student Yulong, I understand your kindness. But the problem is not big, so don't worry. Yulong looked at the ordinary people who kept talking in front of him, but still talked eloquently, frowning deeply and vomiting in his heart. Isn't the problem big? I'm afraid the current problem is a bit serious, right? Abarai Renji looked at the stranger who appeared suddenly, worrying that there was no place to spread the fire in his stomach. While pressing his hand on his wound, he whispered to Byakuya Kuchiki, Captain Kuchiki, do you want me to go? Byakuya Kuchiki looked back at Renji, and whispered blankly, Renji. Have you forgotten the rules in Seriidii? We can't deal with ordinary people in this world at will. Renji glanced at Ichigo, who fell to the ground with disdain, then turned to Yulong and said, This guy is your teacher? Humph, fortunately he is an ordinary person without spiritual power. Otherwise. When everyone on the scene was thinking about each other, there was a scene that surprised everyone. After Yu Taifeng scanned the surroundings casually, he smiled and said, If you struggle with Kurosaki, I'm afraid you will be in shock due to excessive blood loss. Kurosaki Ichigo, lying on the ground, looked at his teacher with a dazed expression. He couldn't think that his seemingly ordinary class teacher could even see the spirit body. However, when Ichigo thinks of his sisters, the flame of hope that has just ignited in his heart is instantly extinguished. He felt that his teacher might just be an ordinary person with higher spiritual power. Because Ichigo has never felt the fluctuation of Ryatsu in Yu Taifeng since entering school for so long. Byakuya Kuchiki frowned slightly while looking at Yu Taifeng, who was talking. At this moment, he felt inexplicably and strangely that Yu Taifeng, who was not far away, had a very familiar feeling. Rukia classmate is also here. Yu Taifeng turned his head and moved his gaze to Rukia, and said with a chuckle. Teacher. take Ichigo and them out of here. It's dangerous here. Rukia said hurriedly, read more at mtlarchive.com. When Yu Taifeng turned to look at Rukia, Byakuya Kuchiki also saw his face clearly. At this time, he suddenly remembered the time-honored portrait in the police hall of the Kuchiki family. Hurry up. Byakuya Kuchiki said coldly. Abarai Renji and Rukia took Byakuya's performance just now in their eyes. Renji, who didn't know the situation, couldn't figure out how Captain Kuchiki, who was still calm just now, would have such an abnormal performance now. Byakuya looked at Yu Taifeng with a smile on his face, and there was already a storm in his heart. When he thought of those horrible legends, he couldn't help but frown a little deeper. After Renji and Rukia walked through the gate one after another, Byakuya Kuchiki directly used Shuinpa and disappeared in place. As they left, the black barrier gate slowly disappeared. Kurosaki Ichigo and Ishida Yuryu looked at the inexplicable scene not far away, both with surprised expressions on their faces. They couldn't figure out why the two Shinigami who were still aggressive just now chose to leave suddenly. Maybe it's a coincidence. Seeing the place where the crossing gate disappeared, both of them breathed a sigh of relief in silence. When Kurosaki Ichigo wanted to comfort the teacher who appeared by accident, he found that the other party had already disappeared from him. Kurosaki Ichigo? Ishida Yulo? At the gate leading to Soul Society, the three Byakuya Kuchiki walked forward silently. At this time Abarai Renji, who was hesitant to speak, finally asked curiously, Captain Kuchiki, why did you suddenly order the retreat? After hearing Renji's words, Rukia, who bowed his head in thought, slowly raised his head, his face also full of doubts. After Byakuya Kuchiki entered the crossing gate, he immediately thought of the scene of his childhood. At that time, he was a naughty child. One day, under the guidance of his grandfather Kuchiki Inling, he completed the day's kendo training. So he and his grandfather came to the police hall in the family mansion. As a child, he pointed curiously at the portrait and asked. Byakuya still clearly remembers his grandfather's manner and words at the time. His name is Yu Taifeng, and he is my classmate at the same time. Although he has nothing to do with our Kuchiki family, you must remember. Don't offend this person. Kuchiki Inling's face was reminiscent at first, and then he showed a jealous expression. Can't offend someone? Is he powerful? Little Byakuya scratched his head with a puzzled look, and asked, curiously. After some conversation, little Byakuya learned about all kinds of amazing deeds that Yu Taifeng had done. Fighting Hueco Mundo alone for 500 years. Room 46 Bloodbath. As time passed, Byakuya Kuchiki also grew up slowly, and he gradually understood what the name Yu Taifeng represented. In the words of his grandfather Kuchiki Inling, that is a person with infinite possibilities. Captain? Captain? Abarai Renji looked at Byakuya Kuchiki, Zhao's, who was in a daze, and asked softly. Brother Kuchiki, what happened? Rukia asked again. Byakuya Kuchiki only reacted, he looked at the two with dignified eyes, and whispered the story of Yu Taifeng. %3D. Grandpa, who is the person in this portrait? Is it the sage of our Kuchiki family? When Byakuya Kuchiki and others left, Kurosaki Ichigo and Ishida Yulong finally relaxed. However, they would never have thought that their teacher would leave without saying goodbye. Fortunately, we still care about his safety, but he was scared away. Kurosaki Ichigo, who was lying on the ground, roared. Although Ishida Yulong didn't speak, his face was not very good looking. As time went by, Kurosaki Ichigo, who had lost too much blood, only felt a trance. At this time a black shadow appeared beside Ichigo with a smile. Episode 79. Teacher? Due to the upcoming summer vacation, Yu Taifeng's recent work is relatively leisurely. After get off work this afternoon, he walked towards the Urahara store when he was free. Xiaoyu. You are so stupid. Jinda's voice came from a distance, and Yu Taifeng gently shook his head and continued walking forward. After a while, he saw Jinda who was bullying Xiaoyu again. Long time no see. Yu Taifeng said while looking at the two with a smile. When Jinda heard this familiar voice, he hurriedly hid the newspaper in his hand behind him, with a panic expression on his face. It was Xiaoyu who had just been bullied. After wiping away the tears on his face, he ran towards this side. Senior. You are here. Xiaoyu said happily when she came to Yu Taifeng's side. After hearing the awkward address in Xiaoyu's mouth, Yu Taifeng smiled awkwardly, and then asked, Where are Urahara and Tessai? Jinda, who has a guilty conscience, also hurried to Xiaoyu's side at this time. After he glanced at Xiaoyu unwillingly, he raised his head and said, "Senior, the store manager and Uncle Taisai are training the Orange Head in the underground. Did you come to the hot spring today? I'm going to inform the store manager and Uncle Taisai." After hearing Jinda's answer, Yu Taifeng thought of the plot in Shinigami's original work. It seems that Urahara and the others are helping Ichigo regain the power of Shinigami. Yu Taifeng secretly said in his heart. He looked at Xiaoyu and 743 Jinda in front of him, smiled and said, "You don't need to notify them, I will go to the hot springs by myself." After that, he walked towards the store in a familiar way. Suddenly, Yu Taifeng turned to look at Jinda and said, "Don't always bully Xiaoyu, or Urahara should take care of you again." Jinda was a little nervous and gently pushed Xiaoyu with her hand, and then smiled and said, "Senior, we were playing a game just now. You must not tell the store manager." Yu Taifeng glanced at the two with a smile, then turned and walked towards the inside of the store, and disappeared after a while. After pushing away the defensive barrier set by Taisai Tsukabashi, Yu Taifeng flashed to the side of the hot spring pool. At this moment, 3 Ryatsu of different strengths are intertwined and collided in the underground space. It seems that Urahara did have 2 shots, but the intensity of this training is also a bit too weak. Yu Taifeng smiled and shook his head. The whole person was submerged in the hot spring pool. The huge hot spring pool seems like no one has been here. At this time, a black cat brought Inoue Orihime and others to the Urahara store. Xiaoyu and Jinda, who were packing things outside the store, greeted the black cat in unison, "Master Yuruchi." Yuruchi looked at the two and asked, "Urahara, are they still training that kid?" After Xiaoyu and Jinda looked at each other, they nodded heavily. "Let's take Ishida and Sato to take a look below." Yuruchi took Inoue Orihime and walked straight towards the store. Although Xiaoyu and Jinda didn't understand what Yuruchi meant, they didn't ask too much, and after closing the store door, they took the two of them and walked underground. "Yuruchi-sama, you are actually a girl." Inoue Orihime looked at the humanoid Yuruchi and said dumbfounded. After Yuruchi glanced at Orihime lightly, he said with a cold snort, "Aren't you still worried when I let you soak in the hot spring?" Read more at mtlarchive.com. Orihime stuck out his tongue in embarrassment, scratched his head and said, "Because Yuruchi-sama, your voice is obviously a boy." After a while, the two came to the hot spring pool. When the two retired their bathrobes and were about to walk into the hot spring pool, only a vague figure appeared in the hot spring pool. Yu Taifeng just sat up from the hot spring pool and saw Yuruchi and Orihime. What a coincidence," Yu Taifeng said with a smile. At this moment, Yuruchi and Orihime exclaimed in unison, "Teacher." After the two looked at each other, they realized that their situation was a bit awkward. Yuruchi hurriedly changed back to the appearance of a black cat, but Orihime could only run blushing in the direction he came. "Yu Taifeng?" A few minutes later, Yuruchi looked at the well-dressed Orihime, and asked a little awkwardly, "Orihime, what did you call that person just now?" Orihime blushed and said, "Yuruchi-sama, he is our head teacher." When Yuruchi was just about to speak, Orihime reacted and hurriedly asked, "Yuruchi-sama, how do I feel that you called the teacher just now?" "Because he is our former teacher," Yuruchi said. While the two were still discussing, Urahara Kasuke brought Ichigo and others over. "Hey Yuruchi, our side is ready. When I take them to the hot spring, you can set off," Urahara Kasuke said with a smile. Yuruchi glanced at the other person, and said seriously, "The teacher is here." After Urahara and Taisai heard Yuruchi's words, they left Ichigo and others and ran towards the hot spring pool. After Yuruchi took Orihime and left, Ichigo and others were full of doubts, but they put on bathrobes and were ready to relax. "Sato, Ishida, what kind of person do you think the manager's teacher would be? It should be a gray-haired old man, right? No, maybe he is a muscular man who is stronger than Uncle Taisai." Ichigo muttered to himself curiously. The two Satos were like stuffed oil bottles, listening to Ichigo's various analyses, without saying a word. However, judging from the manners of the two, they must also be curious about what this teacher looks like. When the three of them walked not far from the hot spring pool, they only saw Urahara and Taisai standing in place with respectful faces, and they didn't dare to show the atmosphere. When Urahara saw the three of Ichigo, he cleared his throat and said, "I will introduce you to our teacher." Yu Taifeng, who already knew who came, waved to them with a smile at this time. "Kurosaki Ichigo? Ishida Yulong? Sato Yasutora?" When Ichigo reacted, he suddenly jumped back and exclaimed, "Teacher." Although the two Satos did not react as fiercely as Ichigo, their faces were full of shock. Urahara looked at the reactions of Ichigo and others, and instantly guessed the ins and outs of the matter. He smiled awkwardly, turned his head to look at Yu Taifeng and said sincerely, "Teacher, can you help Ichigo and the others?" When Ichigo heard these words, he asked with a dazed expression, "Manager, can he help us? Although he is also our teacher, he is just an ordinary person. I can't see how good he is anymore." At this moment, a wave of majestic Ryatsu spouted from Tessai. Through his glasses, the three of Ichigo seemed to see bursts of red light. Except for Urahara, when have everyone seen this kind of scene? At this moment, they have a feeling that they are about to breathe. At this time, Yu Taifeng had walked out of the hot spring pool and put on a bathrobe. He patted Tessai on the shoulder lightly, and said with a smile, "Okay, Tessai, anyway, I have to go to Soul Society recently, so let's go with them." When Tessai heard Yu Taifeng's words, he hurriedly bowed and said, "Teacher, I am too rude. Please don't take it seriously." Yu Taifeng turned around and walked outside. The three of Ichigo, who were still not sure about the situation, were full of doubts as they watched Yu Taifeng's leaving back. "Although I don't know what the teacher is going to do to Soul Society. But if he is there, at least your lives will not be in danger. Okay, hurry up and soak in the hot springs, and get ready to go. Tessai and I are going to entertain the teachers. You guys try to be as fast as possible. In case he changes his mind temporarily, I am afraid you will regret it." After Urahara dropped a few meaningful words, he and Tessai hurried to catch up. Ichigo looked at the three gradually disappearing figures, and the curiosity in his heart inevitably increased. Episode 80. New to Soul Society. Urahara Store, Underground Training Ground. When Urahara Kasuke and Tessai Tsukabashi opened the crossing gate, Yoruchi led Ichigo and others into the crossing gate one after another. "Teacher, the temporary barrier gate we summoned can only last for 4 minutes, you see." Urahara looked at the disappearing figure of Ichigo and others, walked to Yu Taifeng and said respectfully, "Gone." Yu Taifeng glanced at the two with a smile, then walked slowly into the pass-through gate. Urahara and Tessai looked at each other and smiled, and felt very grateful for Ichigo and others from the bottom of their hearts. As the brilliance passed, Yu Taifeng saw the figures running ahead. Just now, Ishida Yulong was almost attracted by the restraint in the space channel. Yoruchi, turned into a black cat, ran fast at the front, watching the direction from time to time. "Has the teacher changed his mind temporarily?" Yoruchi asked inwardly. At this moment, a huge black worm was chasing up from behind with billowing dust. "No. It's the scavenger in the space channel. Run." The most worrying thing in Yoruchi's heart still happened. When she saw the scavenger appeared, she hurriedly turned around to remind everyone. At this time, she also saw Yu Taifeng walking leisurely in the back. "Teacher. Danger." Yoruchi reminded loudly, instinctively. When Ichigo and others heard Yoruchi's shout, they couldn't help becoming nervous, and the pace under their feet couldn't help but speed up a bit. Yulong, who was carried by Sato on his shoulders, saw what was happening behind everyone's eyes at this moment. After the black scavenger opened his mouth wide, his speed increased again, and he was about to swallow Yu Taifeng into his stomach. "Huh?" Yu Taifeng snorted coldly and stopped. At this time, Yoruchi remembered the difference between his teacher and this group of young people. Her nervousness also slowed down, but she still maintained a super fast-moving speed. After Yu Taifeng stopped, he turned to look at the oncoming scavenger. He directly raised his left hand, emitting a dazzling white light. Boom rumble. After a loud noise, the huge scavenger was directly blasted into fly ash by the white thunder emitted by Yu Taifeng. After Ishida Yulong saw the scene, his glasses almost fell to the ground. As a Quincy, he is very sensitive to Lingzi. When he saw Yu Taifeng who turned around, he couldn't help being stunned. Because he could very clearly feel the seemingly random attack just now. The huge energy contained in it is definitely tens of thousands of times as much as he can send out ordinary spirit arrows. While Yulong was still silent in shock, he only saw an afterimage passing by his side. Read more at mtlarchive.com. "So fast," Yulong secretly said in his heart. When this black afterimage passed by everyone, Yoruchi found that Yu Taifeng Jing had left the space channel. The teacher is the real flash goddess, Yoruchi thought in her heart. 100 years later, when Yu Taifeng came to Soul Society again, he decided to go to the place where everything started. He first went to the Zaraki district to look at the small yard where he once lived, and then went to the black market in the Tsalu district for a while. Boom rumble. Boom. A loud noise came from the direction outside Siriidii. Yu Taifeng fixed his eyes and saw that the tall fence that Siriidii used to defend was slowly falling down. After feeling the Ryatsu coming from the white gate in the west, his figure turned into an afterimage and rushed over there. First team meeting room. Aizen showed an imperceptible smile when he heard Yamamoto Shigekuni announce his order. He glanced around without a trace, and finally fixed his gaze on Byakuya Kuchiki. I saw that although Byakuya looked cold, his slightly frowned brows were particularly obvious. After Yamamoto announced the adjournment of the meeting, everyone also dispersed with different expressions. Tosen Kaname and Ikamaru Jin closely followed Aizen far behind. In a short while, the three of them came to a secluded place, one after another. Master Aizen, according to the news just received, there is an abnormal spatial fluctuation in the sky above Rukongai. Tosen Kaname said in a respectful voice. Aizen looked at Tosen with a serious face, and said with a smile, everything is planned as usual, so be it. While the two were talking, a loud noise came from outside Siriidii. 0, look for flowers. In an instant, all the organ walls protecting Siriidii were triggered, and they fell from the sky one by one. After seeing this scene, Aizen smiled and said, it's really fast here. Silver, go and see what's going on. Yes, my lord. After receiving the order, Ikamaru Jin immediately turned into an afterimage and disappeared in place. Outside the Baidao gate to the west of Siriidii. Xiao Danfeng is waving the giant axe in his hand, fighting with Ichigo. After a crisp sound, his axe was cut in half by Ichigo. When he saw that the weapon in his hand was cut off by the opponent, he directly knelt on the ground and began to cry bitterly. Ichigo and the others looked so sad that they were like a 300-ton child, and they were speechless for a while. At this time, Yu Taifeng's figure appeared in front of everyone out of thin air. Teacher. Yoruchi said excitedly first. Yu Taifeng smiled and nodded, which was regarded as a response to Yoruchi. Hey, teacher. Why did you run away alone? Ichigo said with some dissatisfaction. When Yoruchi heard Ichigo's words, he just wanted to teach the other party, but discovered Ishida Yuryu's abnormality. I saw Yulong quickly rushing behind Ichigo, holding his mouth and pulling him aside. Xiao Danfeng, who was still crying bitterly, now focused his attention on Yu Taifeng. When he saw Yu Taifeng with a smile on his face, he sat back on the ground in shock. You brother Danfeng looked at Yu Taifeng in horror, and was speechless for a while. Just as Yulong was about to tell Ichigo the secret he had discovered, only a loud noise came from behind him. At this moment, Xiao Danfeng slowly lifted the Bai Dao sect he was responsible for. But he lowered his head deeply, as if he had seen something terrible. Yu Taifeng slowly walked into the Baidaemon, and when he walked to Xia Danfeng's side, he smiled and nodded to the opponent. Whoever thought of his move made Duo Danfeng even more nervous. My lord, Shu Danfeng, trembling slightly, and said respectfully. At this moment, a silver blade of light quickly struck in the direction of the two at an unimaginable speed.